Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com, Will Schroeder. Will, you've been an ad guy, a member of a typist pool, a salesperson, a carpenter. Let's not forget multi-time startup founder. But like in a world where, we were told like, pick your path, pick your trade, go learn it and do it. Like, how do we even end up being founders, right? And how is it that like somehow we keep running into all these founders who are like, well, but I don't feel like I'm qualified for this, or I want to do something else, but this is what I know how to do. How do I reconcile that when that is kind of how we got here in the first place, right?
I agree. It's fascinating because, fun fact, most of the people that come to startups.com that are starting whatever company, a consumer products company, enterprise SaaS company, you name it, didn't come from that industry. You would think it would be part and parcel.
Yep.
You would think like it'd be 10% or something like that. But I want to give like two layers of abstraction for the folks in the audience. Number one, almost no one was a founder before, because that actually isn't a job that you just get. It's one you create.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it again. A founder isn't a job you get. No one gets the founder. No one interviews for the founder job. You create the job, which means you always get hired.
I was just thinking about like how many times has somebody had a headhunter call them and be like, hey, we're looking for founders, right?
Right,
No
exactly.
ever.
So, but the second part of that is because you create the job, you are by definition inventing yourself. In most cases, reinventing yourself.
Yep.
Yet there's a massive amount of pushback that folks have on the idea of reinventing themselves. We've got this kind of hard-coded feeling that we are this one thing. I went to law school, I'm a lawyer, and that's what I am.
Yeah.
No, that's just something you did. And so I think what would be fun today is to talk about where this comes from, this notion of I can only be this one thing, what it takes to reinvent yourself. And we've done it many
times. Even with a single startup, like within a single startup, I think that's something super important. It's like, how many times have we had to morph and evolve just because the startup did so, right? Like by nature, we know like if your startup pivoted, which a lot of them do, you likely had to reinvent yourself at that point to survive the pivot because the business completely changes. Likelihood is you needed to change at least something at that point, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's important to understand, and I want to make sure we get into this, is every one of those pivots, those changes, those reinventions becomes part of a bigger thing. Right, becomes part of a bigger thing. And we become this sort of Swiss Army knife of capabilities and experiences. And personally, I embrace that. I've got a list somewhere. I'm gonna see if I can bring it up while we're doing our episode, but I've got a list somewhere, job and role that I've ever had. It is hilarious. I made it for my daughter years ago because she was talking about what she wanted to become. And I said, give me a day, because it would take me a minute to recount. And I'm gonna come back to you with every job that your father has had in his life. And Ryan, I kid you, it was like 50 things.
50. Yeah. That's the thing though. But that is our resume. Right. And all of those things come forward, right? Like, are you a carpenter every day? Well, right now, yes. So bad example, but like, you're not a carpenter every day, but you still bring your measure twice, cut once mentality, the tools, the things that you've learned through that to what we do at a startup, right? It's all of these things have their place. We don't stop being one. I think this is the thing when people get really caught up and scared about like reinventing themselves, like, well, I have to stop being that. You may stop doing that on a daily basis, but you're going to stop being that person. I will always have done those things. And so that will always be part of who I am.
All right. I got to share this list. I'm not going to go through all of it.
I hope a big part of me hopes that you're actually just going to start singing That's Life by Frank Sinatra and go through I've been a poet, a pauper, and that's where I feel
this is great. This is in no particular order. In this actual list, I actually put all the date stamps and where I did this. Okay. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Read it fast. Commercial actor, podcast host. What do you say? Basketball coach, high school teacher, telemarketer, sandwich chef, parking lot bouncer, casting director, college lecturer, digital art museum curator, creative director, database engineer, dungeon master, hockey player, radio DJ, triathlete, public company board member, school mascot, head of business development, BBS sysop. Dude, are we going? Our reality show finalist, middle school teacher, children's book author, carpenter, CFO, nightclub owner, receptionist, president, SBA Young Entrepreneur of the Year, professional speaker, RPG game designer,
Yes.
3D modeler, architect, nightclub promoter, interior designer, general contractor, software engineer, field hockey goalie. I mean, this list goes on. I'm not.
I feel based on, I think you missed one, and this is all very recent. A crash test dummy. I feel like with your luck with vehicles lately, that you absolutely have you've at least been doing some engineering testing for a couple of major companies.
Hey, by the way, you know what didn't make that list? I mean, it's on the list, but I didn't even say it. Founder.
Yeah, I was
Like,
waiting for it. Yeah, didn't hear it.
Yeah, that was without even saying like what you know
Forgot
what I
that
actually
one.
do for a
Yeah. Parking lot bouncer. Rumor has it was a Chuck E. Cheese. Is that accurate?
No, that was my first job. My first job was for a pizza place in Connecticut. They had a parking lot situation where everybody kept using their parking lot. So the owner, Lino, paid me like a few dollars an hour to kick people out of the parking lot. Weren't supposed to be parking there.
Amazing.
And I was like 12 years old at the time, you know, trying to be a bouncer and knock people out of parking lots.
But there's some interesting lessons learned there, I'm sure.
But let's talk about reinventing yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Because every one of those were jobs I had, mostly jobs I got paid for. And all of those required me to have some learning or expertise in order to have those jobs and do those jobs. But that's not even all of them. Like I said, I only got like halfway through the list, right? And even I'm laughing because I haven't looked at that list in years. Right. I just brought it up right now. I thought that would be fun to see. But it tells a story of how we are both what we make ourselves, but as importantly, a composite of all the things we try and taste test and
absolutely
get into. But we're also not limited. I don't have like any special capability that anybody else doesn't have, right? Like I'm just very willing to try everything.
Yeah.
To just say, because I feel like, I don't know, Ryan, like at some level, yes, I have the identity of a founder, but to me, that's like saying I have the identity of a creator.
Right.
What I create, what I
highly in specific. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It just says directionally, I like to build stuff. When you think about yourself and you think about some of the different directions you've gone, what are some of the highlights that come out?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, in terms of the directions I've gone, I have to give that some more thought in terms of like the highlight reel there. But there's an interesting thing that I found, and I think it was like the point at which I started to want to reinvent myself were places where all of a sudden I realized that like it had become really familiar and maybe safe as a result. Like this sense that like familiarity equals safety, right? Like I'm a lawyer, I'll just always be a lawyer, and that's somehow safe. And what I realized was that it was just sort of complacency wrapped in inertia. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that. And so for me, there've been these triggers where it's like, if I haven't been pushed or haven't had to try something new or haven't failed at anything in a while, like I get really uncomfortable. I'm like, I get uncomfortable with the comfort. It's like, okay, this has just become commonplace, right? Like, you know, the minute I master something on a relative basis, I'm like, I'd like to move on. I want to try something else. I think that's probably part of the founder ethos in general.
You know, I think what's interesting is a lot of our career is shaped by what we have exposure to. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me give you just a quick little vignette that's always just inspired me. Years and years ago, when I was pursuing one of my job titles, which was board member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, super random people like, wait, what? Yeah, they had recruited me to join the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the most flukish opportunity ever. It made no sense for anybody. But the reason I'm telling you that is because as part of the recruiting process, they would give us tickets to these private concerts. So like when someone got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there was a public concert. There's also a private concert.
Private show. Yeah.
One of the inductions we got to be at, which was amazing, was Metallica.
Oh, wow.
It was unbelievable, right? It's like 200 people in a room, and me and my wife, like two idiots from Ohio, like, what are we doing here? Anyway, that's the point of the story. So Lars Ulrich, who's a phenomenal drummer, right? And, you know, just like a rock god in his own right. Went to Juilliard, by the way. Like not a, and I think they put out
classically trained rock god.
Yeah. But I think like they put out their first album, I think they were when they're 18, if my memory serves me. Anyway, he's sitting up there and he's like kind of teary-eyed and he's giving a speech directly to his parents sitting in front of him. And he said, you guys were always playing music in the house when I was growing up, right? You made music a part of things. And Ryan, I always think of you and your family because I know there's music in the house, et cetera.
I've got an anecdote I'll share right after this that just happened last night.
But here's what he said. He said, Mom and Dad, I'm here because of you. not everybody wants to have their kid be a drummer of all things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know,
I've
right?
actually resisted that one specifically
Yeah,
because it's
me
drums.
too, right? Me too.
Yeah.
And so he said, but I'm here because of you. And I remember when he was giving that speech, like everyone's like teary eyed because it was one of those amazing things to turn to your
Uh-huh.
parents and genuinely thank them for the highest achievement you've ever made. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it was incredible. But beyond that, I just kept thinking as he was saying it, I was like, what if? What if his parents were a bunch of dicks?
Yeah.
And they were like, no drumming, right?
Right.
You're gonna
Stop
become an
tapping
accountant.
on stuff, Lars. It annoys the shit out of me.
It's like back to the abacus. And like
Yeah.
and but what if his parents, again, talking about like how we could become
Yeah.
anything, were just like, no, you're not a drummer.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
you're an accountant. And I'm not knocking accountants, but I'm just saying like
But like, if you can be Lars or an accountant, be Lars, please. Just like,
every time.
God's sake.
What was your vignette? You said you had an idea.
Yeah. So last night, and it's interesting because it's a nice illustration of this. So yeah, we do a lot of musical stuff. The kids by and large like to perform a lot, but kind of to your point, his parents weren't stuffing drumsticks into his hand either, right? They weren't like, you become drummer, right? They weren't Tiger Woods' dad, who was like, you will play golf or die. I think that's how it went. I don't actually know. He's probably a great guy. So last night, for the very first time ever, Jack decided, I was out playing piano and the girls come out and we're singing a little bit as I was playing. And then Jack shows up. Now, Jack loves to play piano with me, loves to sit down. He's learned to accompany me. He's 7, loves to accompany. And then all of a sudden he was like, Dad, you know the song that won the Eurovision this year, Wasted Love? I was like, yeah. Do you know it? I'm like, no. He's like, can you find it? So we found it. We started playing it. He wanted to sing it. He's never done this before, but the girls love to sing. My wife's amazing singer. And so just like he all of a sudden wanted to do this. And we have this beautiful, I will share with you. I will not put it out on broad social, but I will share with you. Nargis just grabbed like a little clip at the end of him singing. It was so beautiful. But one of the most beautiful parts of it was she recorded this and dude absolutely hits the notes at the end, which like, I loved that. And it made me really proud. What made me more proud was the entire family erupted into like just full on joy at him hitting that note. The girls, you hear the girls in the background, you hear me shouting, you hear Nargis screaming because he just crushed it. But it's such a cool thing. Like that is now part of Jack's fabric, right? Like that is part of what he was exposed to, and it will become part of who he is. Now, does he become, a Eurovision star? I have no idea. And I don't care, right? But because of that exposure, but also because we didn't force it on him. Like we all had the friend who's like couldn't come out to play because he had to go to piano lessons and hated his parents. Great pianist now, right? I love to hear him play, but like it was a very different thing. So I think this notion of exposure is super important.
Well, I also think there's this conditioning
Yeah.
that we all come up with. You mentioned it just when you were saying, the parent who makes the kid play piano, whether they love it or not.
Yes.
I say this to say we've all been conditioned and have a bias of our upbringing that comes from wherever it comes from. But how we choose to manage that bias makes us who we are. I grew up thinking that I would become nothing, but I wasn't willing to live with that bias, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like expectations were at an all-time low heading into life.
I think that's super important because I think that, and look, we can assume we're going to become nothing. We can assume we're going to become something great, like whether our parents are the ones driving that discussion or we're the ones driving it. And somehow we like from a really early age, and relatively speaking, could be the start of your career, could be start of your recreation, but we start to pretend that we can draw these like really straight lines around what happens when in the reality, life and career is just like this series of scribbles that are really hard to connect until you can lean back. Sometimes you see a pattern, but I think that's a big part of it, right? Which is being willing to say that like, look, all of these things are going to form who I am. I don't have to accept that because I took piano lessons as a kid, I'm going to become a pianist. I also don't have to decide that I'm not going to do that, or right, that it isn't part of who I am, right? It's all in the batter at the end.
Well, so like I said, we easily get stuck. And I think as we get further into our careers, it hardens. That concerns me the most. Somebody believes, they're 32, which isn't that old, especially within your career. It's like the first quarter of your career, barely.
I thought you were going to say, which isn't that young, because I was thinking about how young I was. I was like, no, it's not that young.
You're early in your career and like, oh, this is all I've done. We'll pick out accountants. All I've done is accounting. And now I want to do this thing in consumer packaged goods. I've invented this new product.
But I'm an accountant, right?
It's like, no, you did accounting. You're not an accountant, right? Like that's not how this works. And I know for myself, at first I didn't realize, like, I didn't think I was meant for anything. So like any work I was taking was good
Yeah.
enough for me. It was like if it was paying, that was my job.
Parking lot bouncer, fantastic.
Done. Done. Like, oh, okay. So hold on. Let me pause there for a second. I just gave a kid his first job this past weekend. A family that we're real close to, and they've got a 15-year-old son. He's actually been previously in my entrepreneurship class, kids school. Great dude. He was trying to figure out what he wants to do for the summer. And I said, well, hey, on the weekends, if you're free, I'm building a house. If you want to come learn carpentry, etc., happy to take you out and pay you. But here's what he said, and he's right, by the way. He's like, what does it pay? And it's so funny, Ryan, because like it's a very reasonable question.
It is.
But I would have never asked that at 15.
Right. Yeah. It's like
what I would have said is,
pays?
do I get paid?
Yeah. It pays? Fantastic.
Like my credo was, if it pays, the answer is yes. Then you can tell me what it is or how much I get paid, right? Just different era. But I thought that was funny. But he shows up on Saturday, and I'm having to do work around the house. And he said, hey, Mr. Schroeder. It's weird that he calls me Mr. Schroeder. I was like, what's up, man? He said, what was your first job? And I told him, this parking lot bouncer. And I was like, Timcho, what's your first job? He said, this is it.
This is it.
I was like, bro, this is your first job?
First job, yeah.
Yeah. He's like, yep, this is my first day on my first job. I'm like, man, that's a lot of pressure. I'm gonna have to drop some nuggets, some golden nuggets of
that's right. I got this is no longer, I'm no longer an employer. I'm a mentor. Damn it.
Yeah, damn it. You made my life harder. Anyway.
You can add to your list of 50 now. You can child labor crew manager.
Oh no, this is so funny because when I was working with him, I was showing him how to do framing, like doing framing. And I said, Tim Trev, have you ever seen The Karate Kid? He's like, oh yeah, the Will Smith movie. I'm like, God damn, dude. He said, oh yeah, the old movie with Will Smith. I was like, no, that's like,
no.
And I was joking to him. I was like, my fear here is that I'm going to teach you all these cool skills, but you will not know karate at the end of it. And he totally lost on him. He didn't understand my Mr. Miyagi at all. But the whole point of that story is that right now, he's figuring out who he wants to be.
Yeah.
Right? He's
who he thinks he wants to be, right?
Like a D1
for today.
But what I'm explaining is that the field is wide open, man. And here's what I say. Be lots of things. Be lots of things so that you can counterbalance.
Which is so funny, right? Like we sort of understand that at the beginning because we're not bound by anything, right? At the early stages, it's like, well, okay, I can be whatever I want because I'm not anything yet, right? So this is where like we know that like curiosity starts to die, creativity starts to die as we get older, like on a relative scale. Some of us still very creative, some of us less so. But I think that like we have to start thinking of those experiences and that resume as an inventory. But I see so many people, particularly founders, because they want to make a big change. To your point, they come from one industry, they want to do something completely different. But instead of treating that as like a toolkit and an inventory, they treat it like a chain, right? And it holds them to this place that they're in, which I think is super, super painful to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me expand on that. We tend to think who we are as solely put toward our career, what we get paid for, right?
Right.
When I tell people I'm a carpenter, they're like, "Oh, you do carpentry for a living?" I was like, "I don't get paid for it, but I probably do more carpentry than most carpenters." Like it doesn't, like me getting a check for it doesn't like make me a carpenter.
That's not what defines it. Yeah,
exactly, right? Any more than your wife getting paid to perform makes her a performer or not. I mean, she's great at what she does, but the paycheck doesn't change it.
Exactly.
I say that to say most of us only have one or maybe two things that we can do, the capabilities we possess that are pay worthy. Again, like because we understand accounting or law or something like that. But that doesn't define the constrictions of who we are or who we can be. I've had like 50 careers, some of them paid, some of them pursuits. Me choosing to go professionally with it or, get paid for it is incidental. The reason I bring this up is because I think a lot of people associate their identity with what they get paid for.
100% they do, right? It's, again, some people. I would argue most founders do, at least at the point where they're making decisions around what they're doing with their lives as founders, right? Because they're saying, I'm now going to go do this other thing that's completely different than what I've ever done. Go back to that whole like safety, familiarity dynamic that we talked about earlier. I think it all feeds together and they start to say, well, because that's what I did before, it's what I should keep doing. And now that's who I am because that's what I got paid to do, which I think is relatively easy to understand, like why it happens, right? This is how the world values you monetarily.
I get it. I think early in my career, by accident, I got pulled into lots of things that I
Mm.
somehow got paid for because I was like hustling, right? Like
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure
Yep.
anything that would make money.
Yep.
And so if it made money, I would figure out how to do it. When I graduated high school, right before I graduated high school, I got two full-time jobs. During the day, I was doing telemarketing essentially, selling mainframe computers. And at night, I would go make sandwiches. And so neither of those was a career that I wanted to have forever, but they were the first person that offered to pay me anything. And so
Yeah.
I just became
Yeah.
that.
I don't have a job now. I don't have money now. You have a job that offers money. Okay, that'll work. Those were, you checked both my boxes.
You know, something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists, you may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it. But what was interesting about it, and this is really what kind of set me off, like on just this chain of events, was that it didn't occur to me that I couldn't do something. And that wasn't because I was bursting with confidence. It was just more ignorance. I didn't know enough about what that thing was. I'll give you an example. So I'm 17 years old. I get this job selling mainframe computers. Now, it just so happened on this bizarre chain of events going through the 80s and what would now be the early 90s that I knew way more about computers than most of the people at this company that I was working for.
Sure.
Right? Because I just got into it early, right?
Yeah.
Another chain of events. And so I get on the phone, and mind you, I'm 17 years old. My voice is like this, but I'm talking like this, right? But it's all over the phone, so no one knew.
Right.
And so I'm calling what used to be considered MIS managers. If you can think back to your Ohio State,
Oh yeah,
when MIS was a
oh
thing.
yeah.
And I'm basically saying, hey, do you need memory boards for your DPS 9000 Honeywell machine, whatever it was, right? And they're like, yeah. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll go write up a quote for it for $20,000, and I'll send it to you. And my boss is like, what are you doing? You're just supposed to call, and see if there's a lead and then pass it over to me. And I'm like, well, if he says he wants the product and we have the product,
Yeah, we have
to
the
sell it to him.
Yeah.
Like
isn't that what we're doing here?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I remember the president of the company, of this computer company, was like, wait a minute, you just closed all your own sales? I was like, yeah, what else would I be doing here?
Yeah.
Why else am I on the phone? Right. And I wasn't saying it like being cocky. I actually just I was like,
hi, you want to buy something? Yeah. Okay, we'll call you later.
And so president of the company and took me under his wing. And he was like, I'll never forget. He's like, I'm going to make you the deal of your life. I'm like, oh, Donald Trump, what have you?
Yeah.
He's like,
go on.
I'm moving you. Get this right. I'm moving you from $5 an hour to $10 an hour.
Boom.
So you will now have a sales quota.
Doubled your income, but you'll now have a sales quota at $10 an hour.
I had no idea that I could ever make $10 an hour. And number two, I actually didn't know what a sales quota was.
Yeah, didn't matter. I know what the doubling in my hourly pay is, and whatever it needs to happen, I'll do that.
You had me at quitting my sandwich job. What was fascinating about that experience, and I say this because these things come in such non-specific random ways. Ryan, next day I wake up and I'm computer sales guy. And I'm like, how the hell did this happen?
What happened? Yeah.
And I started to watch this pattern in life of what it takes to reinvent. Okay. And it always started tiny. It was never this big thing. And I think this is important. It was never this big, like overwhelming commitment, right? I'm now a dancer, right?
Yeah.
it was never that.
Yeah.
It was a tiny event. The whole idea of how do you move a mountain one pebble at a time? A tiny event that just imperceptibly at the time shifted me towards something and became something more. Have you gone through the same thing where think about it like what you did here, like when you were doing sales initially, and we needed help marketing, and you're like, yeah, I can help marketing, right?
Yeah.
And you started to chip in, and now you're a CMO.
Yeah, I think it's been largely the same thing for me, man. It's like these little opportunities come along, right, to maybe kind of stretch things a bit. Step into a room that you haven't been in the past. Like there's just little tiny things. And I guess in my case, a lot of it came from, some of it just came from necessity, right? Like something needed to happen. I'm like, well, I'll try to do that. Do you know how to do that? Well, I'll try to do that.
Yeah, right.
Or things where it was like maybe even personal necessity. Like I want to go do something else. I want to be somewhere else. But in most cases, going back, it was less about necessity and more about curiosity, right? And desire. Like it was like things that I legitimately wanted to try. And I think that like kind of in your own case, in that one, a little bit more opportunistic, but in the story you were telling, it came from prior knowledge of computers, right? Which came from your curiosity, right? And at a time where you were a kid and you could just explore. Kind of the same thing for me. And we were both kicking around, TRS 80s or whatever back in the early 80s. And so like
Ryan, think about your journey here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you didn't join as our CMO.
No. Started on the phones talking to folks and doing some consulting work. Then went over. We realized we needed to kind of reframe the entire consulting division. Jumped in on that side, and then that led to what were they like? That's actually pretty funny. If you look back through the LinkedIn, there was like content, innovation. I feel like there was another one in there somewhere, and then eventually, CMO. And so, but this is like it's so common, right? Like it's funny to me that it doesn't feel funny. I think other people look at that and go like, "What the right?" That just feels totally normal and natural to me. Like, well, of course I've done a bunch of different shit. We've been doing this for 15 years. What do you think? Like, I'm not an accountant.
Yeah. Well, okay. So think about it like this. The more we realize that we can take on something else, the more it exacerbates that feeling. I'll give you an example. You've watched me through this journey, becoming a carpenter, now general contractor, architect, 3D modeler, like you name it. And, when I walk people through this house that we're building, I'm highly specific about all the different parts of the house, about how like I designed the electrical systems or the network map or like, how we did the architecture a certain way. And they're like, how do you know all this stuff?
Yeah.
Right. Like, how are you the GC of this, the general contractor of this thing? And I was like, I didn't know any of it. That's the point. The point is I knew none of this going into it, not even a little bit. And no one schooled me on it either. But, like as we were getting into the architecture, I had this idea, this caveman painting of what this house would be. And I brought it to an architect. And the architect gave me something totally different than what I was looking for. And so I brought it to another architect. And after months and months and months, he gave me something totally different. And I'm sitting there getting frustrated. By the time we're at the third architect, if you remember this, Ryan, this is like years into the process. I see this guy on the team, and he's doing like a 3D model of the concept of what they were trying to put together. And I asked him, I said, hey, how are you doing that? That I'm using a program called SketchUp.
SketchUp.
Right. And I was like, I've used that a little bit for woodworking in the past. Let me figure it out. Now, nobody in their right mind would sit down and say, I'm going to learn how to do 3D modeling architecture. I'm going to literally design my own house. And it's a good sized house. So like, it's a lot to take on. The same person wouldn't say, and I'm going to build it myself, and I'm going to learn how to build cabinetry, and I'm going to learn how to, do all these things and do it all myself. The reason I was able to do all that stuff is because I started really small every single time. That's been my super like secret move to that long resume that I read off. What I learned is you can do almost anything if you start with the 1% at a time. That's what I think is fascinating. And I try to teach my kids this. I try to explain to them that the journey through everything starts with a single step. That's the most basic, unintimidating step. And I'll give you an example there because I shared this with you earlier today. My son comes to me in one of, you were talking about Jack coming to you. And so Will comes to me and he says, Dad, I found these nunchucks in storage, right?
The fact that was even something he could say makes me really happy. I found these nunchucks in storage. Of course you did, son. They've been waiting for you.
Anyone in our audience that may have been so fortunate to grow up in the 80s likely went through the same ninja training that I did, whether it was foam rubber stars, nunchucks, bow staff skills, computer hacking skills.
Yeah.
Anyway, he comes to me and he's like, Dad, do you know how to use these? I was like, buddy, if you only knew. And we put on a Bruce Lee video. I was like, this is where this is supposed to go.
Yeah.
And let your father show you how to use the nunchaku. So I'm whipping him around and doing all this crazy stuff, like literally living my 8-year-old self all over again. And he's like, can I learn to do that? And I said, yes. One step at a time. Ryan, what does he immediately do? Spins it around, hits himself in the eye.
Right in the face. Yeah. I mean, like that is lesson one. That is lesson one. Nunchuck comes back, right? That's what you learn. That which is spinning comes around.
Dude, almost on cue, my daughter Summer picks up another pair and spins it around.
Wait, you had enough for full combat? You had the combat set. You had more than one?
One does not only hold one pair of nunchaku.
True.
It's clearly you need backup. Anyway, thankfully they're foam padded. Point is, even in something as silly as I tell the story, just 'cause it's a funny story, but what I tell them whenever we're getting into anything is you can absolutely do this. You can absolutely reinvent yourself so long as you start with one tiny step.
Little bit.
And let those build progressively. And I've used that technique to get into a dozen different industries that I had, from pharmaceuticals to entertainment, to you name it, right? I've used that technique, especially now combined with AI, to be able to learn stuff I should have no business even 1% knowing. Right? Like when I had to do all the electrical engineering for this new house, like, there's a lot of house there. There's a lot of electrical engineering. When I was doing all the load calculations and everything, the electrical engineer is like, "How the hell did you do any of this?" I'm like, I don't even know what it means. I just went to ChatGPT. I put in all my inputs and I got load calculations. He's like, "It's spot on." I'm like, "Well, don't blame me. I blame ChatGPT." The point is, I can now do stuff that I would never be able to touch before. It's awesome, and I think it's an important fundamental skill for founders to have.
It's probably one of the most important, right? Because again, like if you're setting out to build something that's never been done, forget about like all the kind of requisite skills you have to have. Like you have to know how to code things, you have to know how to design things, you have to understand finance, you have to understand management, leadership, all that stuff. That's great. But there's always going to be that layer of, but no one has ever built exactly what we're building right now in the way that we've built it. So it is a process of invention. And so like, I think, again, to your point, having that muscle that says, anytime I want to do something new, I'm going to start with what's the most basic step I can take. And then how do I build that into 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Like, how do I go from just being nunchaka to bow staff and knowing how to sharpen my own caltrops and, all that stuff, right? So it's important, but you have to take it stepwise, just like building the startup. We are building ourselves in parallel as much as we are building the startup, and it requires reinvention. I know very few founders who've built something that I would say is like super interesting, or like, of course, like if you were an accountant, you're like, I'm going to go start an accounting consultancy. Yeah. Right. Like, of course you knew how to do that because you were already in one. But if you're an accountant and you're like, I'm going to go build an auto optimizing personal finance widget that listens to household conversations through your Amazon devices to figure out how we could better manage your finances, that's something totally different. And just because you have an accounting background and understand the financial piece of it doesn't mean you know how to do any of the rest of it.
But Ren, let's talk about how all these stack. What we've been talking about is, hey, you're doing this, but now you're going to do this thing.
Yep.
What I think is most fascinating, I think what has been the cornerstone of our careers has been how all of those different facets and personalities and job titles have come together to make us the Swiss Army knife that we are today. My curiosity across so many different disciplines and industries, et cetera, has actually made me a really good startup advisor.
Sure.
Because 90% of the time when I get in front of a founder, the world that they're in, I have some direct connection to.
Yep.
Right? It's very rare that they say, hey, this is what I'm working in, that I haven't had some experience in that field, not making me an expert, just having some sort of connectivity. And when I look back, I would probably tell you that it wasn't until like my 5th career change that all the pieces started working for each other. Let me explain. I told you I took that job, telemarketing. In that job, I was learning sales.
Sure.
But it turns out I was already great at sales because in the previous roles that I had throughout high school, they were always presentation worthy. I was always person on stage. I was class president. I was always person like pitching, so to speak, right? And so that kind of helped me in what would become a formative sales role. Well, that sales experience that I gained from a job that I really didn't even want, which was the telemarketing job, was paramount when I started one of the first interactive agencies. You know, be able to go in front of clients and pitch, right? At 19. How many 19-year-olds have pitched anything? I'd been pitching for years, right? Like I was actually pretty good at it.
I pitched a couple fits at that point. I too had a lot of those same kind of roles where it's like I was responsible for pitching stuff. I was the idea person. I had to go convey the ideas to the powers that be to make them do what we needed them to do. But yeah, most people will not have gone through that at that age.
And then when I started the agency, you started one as well, so you can appreciate this.
Yes.
All of a sudden, I had 3 disciplines, technology, marketing, and design, that I needed to be good at all of them because I was the only person working there.
God, but man, how much more did you love that phase? Then I literally felt like I was being drawn and quartered or whatever the hell drawn into 3 pieces would be at some point, that was literally when like the impetus for me to stop having the agency came. Luckily, an opportunity to sell it came along, but like there came a point where just having to manage those three distinct disciplines, being able to speak their languages was the core skill. Like I knew the job, I knew all three of the jobs, so I could keep them from killing each other. That became my role.
But who would have guessed that technology, marketing, and design are the fundamentals of being a startup founder?
Yeah,
Right. Like, it just
right.
so happened that those three disciplines around product and UX design, around
Yep,
customer acquisition, and of course around technology for a
yep,
lot of what we build would become the cornerstones of becoming a startup founder. Like,
yep.
didn't see that coming.
Back to my straight lines versus scribbles thing, right? Like this is exactly where that starts to come into focus.
And I guess because I embraced all of these different roles, if I were to like kind of peel this back to at a core what I've always been a creator, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
just a creative
Yep.
person. I like creating things, whether I'm writing, whether I'm building, whether we're designing a new company idea, whatever. I just like in creating and inventing stuff.
Yep.
And it didn't really matter what it was, still doesn't. Right.
Yeah.
I don't care if I'm building a house or I'm building a company. I just like building stuff.
Building stuff. Yep.
And because of that, I never really tried to pigeonhole myself to say, well, I'm just going to build technology. I'm just going to
Right.
coder guy, right?
Yep.
Or I'm just going to do UX design. I'm just that person. I was like, I don't know. I like to create. I'm just going to do everything.
I want as many
It,
ingredients as possible for my
yes.
builds. Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and I would say, Ryan, at this stage in my life, now that I'm in my ripe 50s, I am more open-minded to exploring how to learn more stuff than I have ever been. Because now I realize the value of the composite. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what a lovely time to come to that discovery, given that we've got more ability to learn at our fingertips than ever before. Like I've been having this challenge lately where I keep running into people who I would say are like underinformed, underskilled. Like they just don't seem to know how to do things. And I'm just like, but how? Right? Like you got all of this. Like if I could get one more thing out of life right now, one more thing. If somebody was like, okay, we will grant you something, what would you love right now? I'd be like, could I have 5 more hours added to the day where I can just lock myself away and learn things and nerd out? Like I literally want to go back to like, and I'm sure you remember this too, like when I was 15, 16, 17, I could direct a lot of my time. Now, we had the farm at that point, so I was working hard for sure. I was also building the first tiny tech company, and so there were a lot of things. But part of that was the exploration. Like the tech company came out of me nerding out about databases and connectivity and accounting systems, right? And so like part of me, like that's the thing I would really love out of life right now, is to just have a little more of that, like lock myself in a room. And I did this like 3 Sundays ago. I was like, all right, family, normally this is you time. Today it's this guy time. And I just spent the day with N8N. I was just like, I want to sit down and really just like figure out how to build a couple things that I think are possible, but I haven't had time to do. And that's it. Like, because there's so many tools out there right now, so many interesting ways to connect information, so many things we can go build, and the ability to do it's never been higher. So great time to come to that realization, Will.
But I think it also comes with a freedom of letting go. The
Oh yeah.
freedom of stopping and saying, wow, I'm actually not just this one archetype. I'm
Sure.
not, just this one thing. And I don't think for a lot of people that's heretical. Like what are you talking about? Again, I'm an accountant. I'm a lawyer. I mean, no,
Yeah.
you understand law. That doesn't
Right.
make you just a lawyer, right?
Right.
You're not this one thing. And when you let that go and you say, hey, the past is the past, my future and my resume is when I make it, that opens up incredible doors. And I think as founders, Ryan, like, can you imagine a founder that doesn't give themselves that latitude? That's dangerous to me.
It is dangerous, and we do see it, right? And like to me, it's always like I think some of it goes back to that safety thing, right? They're like, look, this is what I knew, this is what's gotten me to here, so this must be the good thing, right? So I can't fully let go of that. And at some point, you're just watching what's happening as a result of that inability to let go. And I always see the same metaphor in my head, which is like they're holding on to the anchor, thinking it's the ship, right? This is the thing that's going to get me where I'm going to go. And it's not. It's the thing that's going to keep you where you are. And in fact, it's instead of keeping you safe and keeping you above water, it's the thing that's going to sink you. I see this all the time. I talked to a founder either late last week or early this week, absolutely suffering from exactly this. So I hope they're listening. I will definitely send them this episode. But the same kind of thing. It was like, well, because this is what I already know, I need to lean on this because this is what people know me for. This is what they believe. I was like, but it's not that connected to what you want to do, right? And they're like, yeah, but I've got to find a way to make this the foundation. Why? Because I think it just comes back to safety.
I agree. And I think safety is not a luxury in our business, right? The nature of being a founder, when people say a couple words that come to mind, safety is never one of them.
Not one.
The polar opposite. Right? But let's look at it like this, Ryan. If we're in the business of inventing, creating things that have never been created before in markets that have never existed before, with teams that have never existed before, it would stand to reason that the thing we should be most concerned about reinventing and creating is ourselves.
Yes.
And I think if we can't put ourselves in the mentality that anything is possible for reinvention, that anything can be changed based on what the markets are or what our passions are, then that's not really synonymous with being a founder. So I think for all of us, being able to zoom out and say, what I've been isn't who I am. What I want to be is who I am, which is the fundamentals of being a founder. Then we set a path, then we set a course, which allows anything we could possibly imagine to be possible, especially with ourselves.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.